Good afternoon, all you codeless people out there, and welcome to the final edition of Codebusters this October 27th. Halloween is right around the corner. Oddly enough, I'm not going to be a Codebuster for Halloween. I probably should. And just like everything else in my life, I got a few days to figure it out. So maybe that's what I'll do. So yeah, so we're going to wrap it up with one more myth. Not to say there aren't plenty of other myths that we could bust, but we got a lot of other great things to cover as we move forward toward the end of the year. But we're gonna focus on the myth right now. And this myth, and why don't we pull it up? Let's just get right into the sharing. And so this myth is again coming right off of Uncork's website. Myth number 5 is the one that we're going to focus on today. No code is only good for greenfield apps. All right, I'm just going to read the reality as well. So, no code allows organizations to take a modular approach to innovation, replace what you have, keep what you want. With no code, you can build upon, unify, or deprecate legacy systems via API, SFTP, batch imports, exports, so on and so forth. Right. So for folks who maybe just first off don't understand, are not maybe familiar with the concept of greenfield apps, think about the green field, right? It's beautiful, it's open, it's empty. You can do whatever you want, right? So the idea of a greenfield app, as we're talking about it here, is you don't have to worry about other systems, you don't have to worry about other requirements, you get to just decide everything on your own from scratch, no dependencies, and really build exactly what you want without a lot of the other concerns that often come with building apps, particularly in the enterprise, right? And let's also be real, no code codeless is great for greenfield apps. Okay, the myth is that it's only good, but part of the reality is that no code, codeless architecture, codeless as a service, get ready for that. Codeless is great for greenfield apps, right? It's great for prototyping things, getting something up really quickly, iterating, being very agile, being very iterative with your development, being able to make those changes often in real time, sitting in front of a user, asking them questions, watching them use the application, and literally go in and drag and drop and change how things work on the fly, right? You can get a lot of benefit when building greenfield apps, particularly when you're doing it in a very agile manner, when you use a codeless platform. So I first just want to say that uh, codeless architecture is great for greenfield apps, right? We want to learn, we want to move fast, yeah, and so on and so forth, right? Okay, but the myth is that it is only good for greenfield apps, and that's where we feel it's quite wrong, right? And we've shown a lot of the reasons why. We're going to show a lot more of the reasons why that isn't actually the case, because there's the reality, as we all know, and the reason why Uncork is so focused on the enterprise is enterprises, they've been around for years, decades, centuries, potentially, right? Depending on what company you're talking about here. There's almost nothing that's greenfield in the enterprise, right? Everything is going to leverage other systems that already exist, legacy or brand new greenfield apps, right? You're going to need to connect your greenfield apps together. It's going to need to leverage entitlements and authentication and security that's run across the organization. I think we talked a lot about that last week with Shadow IT and how some of the ideas around single sign-on and being able to hook into an IDP that you use for, or an identity provider that you use for your entire organization is key, right? So there's the element of that. The reality of enterprise and really most software development in that matter is you're going to have to integrate with something. You're going to have to use some other platform. So we're going to show many of the ways that you can easily do that within Uncork and build that kind of composable application that works in harmony with other applications that you have in your organization, be them legacy or brand new. But then there's also the other side of it, which is you may not just be, you may be building a new application that has dependencies on existing applications. And again, we'll show why, how seamless that can be. But other times you just need to refactor existing applications, rebuild existing applications, modernize existing applications. And that is not something that you really consider greenfield, right? Because you have your requirements from the previous version of the application. It does X, Y, and Z. Your new version of it is going to need to do X, Y, and Z. You don't often have the choice to determine whether or not you support those requirements. They're often like the baseline requirements that come with any type of a refactor. So when you're refactoring apps, you are gonna. I think we're gonna show what I'm gonna show for this stuff is all focused around the codeless definition, right? And number one, how leveraging that allows you to quickly recreate a lot of these existing requirements into your new system, but also even think about, as you see in that import and export, actually importing some of the logic and importing some of the functionality of that system, whether it's custom built, whether you're using a different platform, actually bringing that stuff in and giving yourself a basis to build on top of, while still meeting the requirements of the existing app. All right, so just to kind of summarize the opening before we start to dig into the platform and talk about it in the concepts of that. Number one, no code is a great way to do greenfield apps. It's a great way to have multiple different people get involved in this, quickly prototype and test out and get user feedback right away. Right, the last thing you want to do is go disappear for months at a time, build something, then go back to your users, and then they're like, nah, this isn't what we were looking for, and then you got to go do it again, right? That constant iterative agile approach is really great for greenfield apps where there isn't already maybe a wealth of information or feedback that you've gotten from existing versions of an application. So while it's not only good for greenfield apps, it is great for greenfield apps. Again, it's going to be great when you need to build a new application, which is slightly greenfield in the sense that you get to maybe define the requirements and it's a new venture for your organization, but it's going to need to hook in to a number of other systems that you already have. And then the last is actually just taking one of those systems and modernizing it, rebuilding it in something like a codeless platform such as Uncork. Okay. So in order to show it, I think, you can probably guess where I'm going to go first, as we look back here and, what's even the first thing that we say in terms of some of the capabilities that allow you to build not necessarily greenfield apps, it's APIs, right? So go back, watch the IPAs with APIs series where we're quickly standing up APIs, how quickly you can do that in Uncork, and all the places that you can leverage that, right? So let's just go back into services administration in Uncork, right? The ability to support out of the box a wide array of standard authentication protocols inside of Uncork, right? So your typical OAuth authorization flows, bearer tokens. Well, we even got some Twilio and Plaid. And, I think what we really want to focus on are more of the general standard ones, and then when there are organizations that we have partnered very closely with and work very closely with, we might have Uncork might have a dedicated integration type, authentication type just for them. But I'm actually going to show you how we as a platform do not ever need again to build custom authentications for things like Twilio and Plaid. So I'll get to that in a hot second. SOAP. Nobody loves SOAP, right? I mean, I think there's probably a lot of people who are watching who've gotten into technology more recently, maybe even very recently, when a platform like Uncork has kind of been able to enable them to do things they may not have typically, done without, learning all the code stuff. SOAP was a miserable way to have two systems connect. I don't think there's anyone who liked SOAP. It was all XML based, massive documents, huge payloads, non-performant, really difficult to parse. Just think about like what XML looks like, right? Versus what JSON looks like. There's, or even YAML going forward and other things like that. XML has all this cruft around the data that you really need, which increases your payload side. So, thankfully, not many of us have to deal with SOAP anymore, but there's SOAP applications out there right now, and Uncork can certainly connect to them. Right. We get down to here things like the FTP encryption. And now here's what the one I wanted to show you. Let's take an example of this type of authentication is AWS Signature 4. Okay. This, if I open up other environments and within Uncork, like not everybody is going to have the authentication type of AWS Signature 4. Okay. Which is because Uncork as a platform didn't build it as if we built the Twilio integration or the Plaid integration, where they had something unique about their authentication, which required us at the time to develop a dedicated authentication type just for these types of integrations, right? AWS Signature 4 is actually a custom authentication. And so when there's an authentication pattern that doesn't follow an industry standard that are supported out of the box with the platform, no longer do the companies need to write a bunch of code to figure that out, whether that's stand up a service, an intermediate service that would connect Uncork to some authentication type that maybe was custom to their organization, nor do they need to get into the Uncork backlog to say, hey, please build me authentication type X because it requires a header called this in this place and we don't have whatever it may be, right? Now, you can actually create custom authentication types. Okay. So when I choose AWS, so let me just show you, like, this is, a no authentication one, right? As I choose my authentication types, different fields are going to appear relevant to the authentication type that I'm selecting. If I come down, I choose AWS Signature 4, these fields appear, right? These are fields that I defined when I created this authentication type in my environment, and that's done via API, not surprisingly, right? You create the authentication type, you define the bits of information that need to exist when making the connection and any steps that need to happen with that data. Do I need to take the key and the access key and the secret key and hash them a certain way? Whatever operations happen on the data, you can now define in a JSON based format, just as the rest of Codeless, the Codeless definition is, right? And then that enables anyone to create as many AWS Sig 4 authentications that they want with the necessary data, right? So if I have maybe a US East one, a US East 2, a US Central one, a Europe one, whatever my regions are, I might need multiple services connect to the appropriate region. I want different keys and secrets for those services so I can turn off and on those services and keep the connection as secure as possible. Now I can create these based on my definition of what the authentication type is, and that is just going to unlock a whole nother level of services that you can easily connect into Uncork when you're thinking about the concept of building a new application, which is going to rely on other applications, right? And the many different ways you might need to connect to those applications. All right, so this was a great opportunity, I think, to kind of to tease a feature which is going to be very soon generally available. But as the Uncoder, I do get a sneak peek at a lot of stuff. So here you go. So that's a big part. Services are so key to it, and we've seen before, but I'll just show it again in the context of talking about services. When you're actually going and you're then utilizing those services, right? I think just the refresh on that, it is truly just as simple as dragging in the plugin component, choosing that external service, which now you can see AWS, right? Defining what endpoint I want to talk to, mapping things out visually, making that service call, right? Connect to all those systems, extract data from those systems, and even push data back into those systems, right? So one of the big things when you think about Greenfield also kind of assumes that any data that you're going to collect from your end users is going to be stored in this Greenfield application, right? And if no code or Encoder was only good for Greenfield, that would be the only thing you're able to do is say, okay, I'm going to build my application in Uncork. I'm going to save the information from that application in Uncork. That's not the case, right? I can take on any one of my components. I can choose whether or not I want to persist that data within Uncork. right? Or I want to maybe capture that data from the end user in the modules that I'm building, and then ultimately send that data over, through a plugin if you want to do it live, or maybe batch that later, as you saw in the last bit over here, talking about batch imports and exports. Drop that off. If we go into the data event processing, there is the file storage component, right? So you can actually create a view of the data, and then push that to an SFTP or FTP location owned by service. So this is where you would define your credentials about where your FTP lives, push that data, put that data into the appropriate place, right? And then you can have a system, maybe an older system that doesn't have an API, but is used to doing batch transfers of data. Go and pick that up. And batch things like that. It often gets like a bad reputation as being very legacy. Oh, we don't want to do things in batch. We want to do things like offline and later. But as systems are becoming more composable and as systems are becoming more and more decoupled, some of the concepts of batch processing like this are coming up again, and maybe they're coming up in more of like a messaging queue system where you kind of asynchronously push data somewhere, and then the other system, which is, let's say, so I collect some data in Uncork rather than necessarily talking directly to another system and saying, here's the data I just collected, because that might require the user waiting for that to happen. You might be connecting through. Look, I mean, a lot of enterprises out there have very, very strong firewalls that often require a lot of navigation to get through them, and that navigation is going to slow you down. You want to have the best user experience as possible for your users. So maybe you will push that data off somewhere, like an FTP, but really more like a messaging queue, right? And then the other systems will pick that up, and they will eventually get the data that they need into those systems, right? It's this concept called eventual consistency, which says I want all of my systems to be consistent, but as long as they're eventually consistent, they don't need to be immediately consistent, right? Like if I press a button on my browser, do I need that data to immediately get sent to the, I don't know, 700 different databases in my organization that needs the data? No, it doesn't need to be exactly like that. Maybe system X can get it at night. Maybe system Y can get it within an hour, right? The definition of what is eventually acceptable can vary. So don't just look at like batch exporting necessarily, these batch processes, as a bad, while there's newer technologies that help to enable it. It's kind of that same concept of make the user experience as quick as possible, and eventually you'll get that data to be synchronized. Okay. The second part that I wanted to kind of cover as we were talking through, which again we did last week, so I won't go on to it for too long, was again just bringing up the SSO, right? Because a greenfield app might assume that every user in your organization is going to have to create a new email and password login to get into this system. And as we all know, nobody wants that, right? So being able to leverage and tie into your existing identity provider and your access controls that are being maintained by your security organization, having that available to you from the express side, the front end, the designer side, the back of the developer experience. That right there takes an application from being greenfield to not necessarily greenfield, and you can just seamlessly, create those experiences, name the integration, give it what the default role is, and then actually go ahead and configure all the information. Hey, we got XML again, right? Configure all the information that you need to be able to seamlessly log your users in. One of the last things I wanted to show in terms of like from our administration section, which is something that I don't know that I've talked a whole lot about with Uncork in general, to be totally honest. But I think it works really nicely with this idea of greenfield. Is greenfield might also assume that you have a whole new style, a whole new look and feel. Maybe you're rebranding with some kind of a greenfield application, but typically you want to make sure that whatever you build, be it greenfield or something that's going to integrate, aligns with your company's user experience and branding and so on and so forth. that's where you can see that Uncork provides a number of options here, a number of styles that can be layered on top. So if you've already built a wonderful design system, you've already built a wonderful user experience and look and feel, you can easily leverage that inside of Uncork and maintain the consistency across your web properties, or your digital properties, I should say. Okay. All right. So that's services, SSO, styles. So, and that was mostly about, building new applications, which connect to your existing applications, right? So building a new application that needs services that talk to existing applications, building a new application that needs authentication that's tied into existing authentication mechanisms, building a new application which needs to look and feel like your existing applications, doing that all directly through uh, Uncork and Codeless architecture, affording you to do that as you're building these new things, right? But then the other thing we wanted to talk about, the other flavor of like a non-greenfield application that you may be building, is refactoring an existing application, right? Which means I have something, but it's old. Whatever. It doesn't look or feel good. It's leveraging some antiquated technology that we don't want to have to maintain anymore. Maybe it's leveraging a technology that is no longer supported and we need to get off of it. So many reasons why people refactor applications. And that is such a strong use case for a codeless platform to be able to facilitate a very rapid refactoring. Now, I would still encourage folks to try to do that in a composable way, thinking about the previous subset of application types that you can build, which are about connecting to existing systems with a new system, but leveraging that even composable way to get to your refactor app. So let's say you're just going to wholesale refactor something, right? First and foremost, I mean that's a ton of work overall, and I think one good way to show one way why it's so much cleaner. And in court goes back to that codeless definition, right? That declarative representation of your logic. And how you get to that codeless definition could be actually coming in to a module here, right? Going in and dragging and dropping all of the fields that I need, redefining my data model inside of Uncork, rebuilding my logic inside of Uncork. But I just want to go back to my still to this day favorite demo, is those integrations, right? Excuse me, is the importing your business rules, importing your data validations, importing your data models from other systems, right? So because the codeless definition is kind of this intermediate between maybe what a system does before and how it's going to be actually implemented or actually executed in a browser or wherever you're gonna run the application. It's there's so many ways to kind of to bring an existing app and the requirements again around that existing app directly into the codeless definition and then begin refactoring, so you're not necessarily starting from scratch, right? So the examples that we've shown before is taking something that you've built that may exist in an existing system already, and that could be something that you've used another SaaS type platform to create the application, and you want to quickly migrate over, again, the data and the business validations and rules and things like that come with it, or even taking existing schemas that you have, that you've defined, that your enterprise architects have defined, and seamlessly pulling that directly into Uncork and giving yourself that foundation to start to refactor the harder, more complex elements of it. Now, I will say we are so excited about the potential of more automation around taking everything that you can do in some other SaaS platform, or taking everything you can do in code and transforming that into the codeless definition. Um, but we're just at the forefront of this, really exciting path that we're going down. But we've shown you before how, again, you can start even a spreadsheet, right? You think about how much enterprise technology and how many critical business functions are still running off spreadsheets. It's wild. It's wild how many, insurance companies are running their actuarial formulas and algorithms to determine risk and determine premiums and to determine everything else that comes into to making sure that you're getting the best policy possible, or really honestly that both of you are getting the best policy possible, right? So much of that lives in spreadsheets. You've seen finance, so many finance organizations use spreadsheets to track expenses, to track payroll, to track look, we everybody we still use spreadsheets, right? And I still use spreadsheets almost every day. A lot of people use spreadsheets. They have a great purpose, but you don't want to be running a ton of your critical business functions necessarily off of a spreadsheet, particularly when you start writing macros and all the other things that then turn it into kind of a hodgepodge of code and no code and proprietary code and so on and so forth. Being able to take a spreadsheet as a starting point, and then rebuild the application with on top of that spreadsheet, right? So this whole concept of importing things directly into the codeless definition, which we've shown then in the end gives you, sorry, gives you the output. So actually, let's go find this spreadsheet, right? It was a pretty basic one that I used here. But there it is, right? Pulling in a spreadsheet here where we understand that it was date fields and things like that, generating that model that you can then start immediately building with. We've shown it a number of times, again, with something like another vendor who there again you're going to have data validations, and then being able to not just create the interface for you, but create connectors for you, all represented in the codeless definition, which then you can go and you can build on top of. Right. So again, it's great for greenfield. Use it for greenfield. Use it for POCs. Use it for MVPs. Use it for so much. Use it for pet projects. Use it to help yourself at work. I think one of the things that I think folks might actually overlook when thinking about a no-code platform, or we'll just say, or a codeless platform. Let's just say on Quark specifically, is that it's only there to build what your product manager says. It's only there to build what your business partner says. It's only there to build what your boss says, right? It's only there to build so on and so forth. But like, it's there to build what you need too, right? It's there to build, if you're in an organization and you're using a codeless platform, you're using Uncork, go automate some other part of your job, right? Think about the things that you do in a day in and day out basis, and go automate it, right? Go build an Uncork application, a greenfield Uncork application if you want, to help you. But then, of course, again, you're gonna want to connect that to some other system like that you have in your organization. So there's so much opportunity for individuals to not just be building the bigger apps that that are needed by their business, but also to build the things that they want, right? And start to really create that grassroots adoption throughout the organization, of folks. So like if you're an Uncork, creator and you're working as part of a bigger project, um, you're gonna see the value of it as you're building the bigger thing, um, and then go and spend a night at home and build something that helps you, or maybe your company actually even sets up time for you to kind of explore your own things or innovation, or do it over lunch. I mean, how many of us actually take a lunch break anymore, right? What do? You go grab a sandwich and you eat it in front of your computer doing something. We should probably get a little bit of time during the middle of the day, particularly when we're eating, to not necessarily have to be like firing off emails and Slack messages and something, but like that's a great opportunity to just spend 15, 20 minutes, on your lunch break, I'm quoting the word break there, your lunch break, to whip something up in Encore connected to other systems. And then when other people in your organization start to see like, oh, wow, Nick really was able to make his life easier by building an application in Encore to help him do a task, they'll do the next thing. You can share that with others, and again start to really build that up, because it's something you can do as an greenfield project. It is something you can do to tie it into existing projects, and it's something that you can do, to maybe there's a system that you have in the company which you just hate using, right? But you understand how it works. Go ahead and do that. So I think I'm going to leave it at that. We're 4:30. And I hope, and then, I guess one last thing just to add to that was, also if you think about what you then do in Uncork, right? If you think about, oh man, I wish there was a new feature of the platform. I wish I had the ability to view data in a certain way. Um, Build that in Uncork. Build something. I mean, how many developers who are writing code out there are developing tools to help them write code, or developing tools to help them test their code, or maintain their code, or whatever it is? It's the same concept here. You have this development platform which can build greenfield apps, refactor apps, connect to existing apps. And why not connect it to Uncork? Build an app that connects to Uncork to help you build an Uncork, right? So there's so many usages. So the myth that it's only good for greenfield apps, we wouldn't exist as an organization. Codeless wouldn't exist as a movement, if that were true, because the reality of the world is almost nothing is greenfield, as much as we may like. And I hope you saw some of the capabilities in the platform here that show why that's so untrue. So I'm gonna leave you at that. I hope that was a good last Codebusters episode. And as I said, this will be our last one. I think next week we're going to have. Hopefully next week we're going to have our hackathon winner Priyanka, who you might remember from last Wednesday, maybe the Wednesday before. For our grids-based hackathon, and just as we had our winner from our first hackathon on, we're going to have Priyanka on at some point, hopefully next week, if not shortly thereafter. But that's going to be a really fun episode to dig into her winning submission, how she was inspired, and how she was inspired to come and build with Uncork to begin with, how she was inspired to build this award-winning application, and then just really get kind of technical and have fun looking at the details and seeing how things were done. So have a great Halloween, everybody. I hope maybe some of you are going to be Codebusters. I think I'm going to have to be a Codebuster at some point. And check out, uncork.com/no-code-myths to learn more about the myths. Google no code myths. I mean, you're going to see a lot of them. If you do have a myth and you want us to bust it, even if it's not going to be a Twitch episode, fire it over our way on Twitter at the Uncoder, and we will bust any myth you want to give us about Codeless. So thank you all. Have a great rest of your Thursday. Have a great weekend, and we'll catch you next week.